Good afternoon. Please stand for the presentation of the colors by the Wheeling Police and Fire Honor Guard, and we will follow with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. Now I would like to welcome Rabbi Joshua Leaf from Temple Shalom to the podium for today's invocation. Thank you, Rabbi.
Let us pray. Lord our God, we give thanks to you for our many blessings, for health and hope, for comfort and community, for faith and freedom. We pray for wisdom and discernment for all of our elected officials, that they may lead our city forward toward peace and prosperity for all of our neighbors. As blessed as we are here in Wheeling to inherit such a gracious legacy from all of our forebears, our fondly remembered past cannot replace the present, though it certainly guides us in responding to the challenges of today. So too the choices we make today will lay the foundation for our community for generations yet to come. So what will we choose? Health for ourselves alone, or genuine caring for all of our neighbors? Comfort for our own friends and family, or greater access to the good things in life for everyone? Freedom only for those with whom we agree, or liberty and justice for all? While our streets are torn up today, we are building for tomorrow. Let not those orange barrels merely be annoying obstructions in our way. Let them be a powerful reminder of the work yet to be done in our own hearts. As old buildings are restored and new ones constructed, so may we preserve the pride of our past, even as we build anew for a brighter future. Help us, O forgiving God, to show more compassion to our fellow human beings. Help us, O merciful God, to learn when we've gone astray and to return to the path of doing what we know to be right. Help us, O inspiring God, that we might rise again ready to grow both wiser and stronger, more gracious and more prosperous, more accepting and more unified. Let us give thanks for our many blessings by choosing to spend our lives being a blessing unto others. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth and sustains us all. Amen.
Please be seated. Well, on behalf of the City of Wheeling, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 14th Annual and Mayor Elliott's final State of the City Address. Thank you for dodging the orange cones and tolerating our construction on the way here. As elected officials, we know it's the people we're here for. You are the reason we serve. So it's great to see so many friends, neighbors, business, religious, and community leaders present. and thank you for joining us. In addition to members of Wheeling City Council who are here today, there's several other people I want to recognize. Mary Jo Guidi and Roseanne Farrow from Joe Manchin's office, Randy Russell, Ohio County Administrator, Dawn Nickerson and Zach Abraham from the Ohio County Commission, and Sean Fluharty and Diana Winsen-Reed from the West Virginia House of Delegates. Thank you for everything you have done and continue to do for our city. Most importantly, I want to thank today's honorees. I said something very similar several weeks ago at the Wheeling Hall of Fame dinner, but as Wheeling is experiencing a once-in-a-lifetime revitalization, the elected officials often get too much credit or too much blame for how things go. And while members of City Council and myself are happy to accept all the credit you want to give us, the reality is the real credit belongs to the countless individuals in our community who are working every day in their own way, in their own field, to improve our community, help our citizens, and to make Wheeling a better city. So thank you for everything you have done and continue to do to make Wheeling of tomorrow better than Wheeling of today. And I'd like to ask that today's honorees stick around after the conclusion of today's lunch for a picture with Mayor Elliott. And ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, I would now please join me in welcoming the chairman of the Wheeling Human Rights Commission, Rabbi Leaf, one more time.
It turns out there's two steps there. As many of you know, the mayor loves to make a joke that he hates to be speaking after me. And so we thought, in honor of his last State of the City, we'd make him speak after I've spoken twice. The Human Rights Commission is invited each year to suggest people who ought to be honored by the mayor at this address, and sometimes those suggestions are taken and sometimes they are overlooked for better, more worthy candidates perhaps, or perhaps on just time limitations. But this year, we on the Human Rights Commission were concerned that if we named the following person as our honoree, the mayor would certainly decline to honor them, so we snuck it into the program instead. In 2016, Mayor Elliott ran for mayor in a campaign to change the Human Rights Commission, to change our ordinance, to include protections for veterans, for Caucasians, and for people of varying sexual orientations and identities. For the first time in the city's history, there were 2 public working sessions between City Council and the Human Rights Commission. There was a public hearing that drew a huge crowd to the White Palace so that everyone in our community could gather for a thoughtful conversation about what it means to stand up for human rights. In the past several years, city councils have extended civil rights protection to a wide variety of individuals, have recognized racism as a real threat to us all regardless of our own identities, established Juneteenth as an observed holiday here in the city of Wheeling, set aside funding so that every member of the city staff could have implicit bias training, and just recently changed the ordinance once again to adopt the tenets of the Crown Act so that people should not be discriminated against on the basis of their hairstyle. As a person who's had this dopey haircut since childhood, I am grateful. For all of those reasons, and seeing as he is term limited and can't run again, the Human Rights Commission wanted to take this opportunity to honor our mayor, Glenn F. Elliott Jr., for his outstanding support, dedication, and commitment and advocacy for human rights. And this is presented to you at the 2023 State of the City. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was the whole point.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Thank you.
And now a rebuttal from the mayor.
Wow, didn't see that one coming. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 14th Annual State of the City Address here in the City of Wheeling. This is my 7th and final opportunity to speak to you as mayor at this event. I want to start by thanking the City of Wheeling Police and Fire and Honor Guard for presenting our national, state, and city flags. Thank you as well for Rabbi Leaf, not only for that invocation, but for that very expected honor, something that certainly will mean a lot to me. Thank you as well, fellow members of City Council, Vice Mayor Chad Thalman and Councilors Ben Seidler, Rosemary Ketchum, Jerry Sklavonakis, Ty Thorngate, and Dave Palmer. Thank you to City Manager Bob Herron, Assistant City Manager Bill Lanham, and as well as the following department heads who keep our city running every day. City Clerk Jessica Zelensky, who really helped put on today's events. Community Development Director Nancy Prager. Building and Planning Director B.J. Delbert. Police Chief Sean Swartfager. Fire Chief Jim Blazier. Parks and Recreation Director Rochelle Berry. Information Technology Director Mike Lloyd. Human Resources Director Kayla Graham. And City Solicitor Rose Humway Warmouth. As well as all other city staff members who are here today, including Michelle Rajanis, our Marketing and Community Relations Specialist. Thanks as well to Kim Florence and the team here at the casino for hosting this event for so many years. It's just been a wonderful place to have this gathering. And last but not least, thank you to my beautiful wife, Cassandra, for being willing to share me for these past 7 years with my mistress, the city. Before we get started, a quick word about why today's address will be my 7th and final during my 8 years in office. This event used to occur on the last Tuesday of February. Back in 2021, because of the pandemic, we decided to push it back to July. And then we decided to keep it here to ensure that this event never takes place during the middle of a municipal election season. I think that's a better outcome for everyone, except perhaps the poor soul who ends up in this position next year and just is given a few weeks to prepare for this address. But as the only person in the city who is not eligible to be here next year in this position, I'm okay with that outcome. This being my last time giving this address, you're going to forgive me if I run a little bit over my allotted 45 minutes. That said, I can assure everyone you're going to get home in plenty of time for dinner tonight. As is tradition, I'm going to start today by looking not at where we are or where we were headed, but instead how we got to where we are today. And by recognizing the acts of someone from decades prior who helped shape the Wheeling we have today. We call this recognition the Gateway Award, and its first six recipients are on the screen. Or maybe they're not on the screen. Oh, well, I'll read its first 6 recipients. We have former Mayor Jack Liphart, former City Councilman and Planning Commissioner Barry Crow, former Mayor Nick Sparshane, former Wheeling Heritage Executive Director Heidi Friend, former City Manager and former Vice Mayor Mike Now, and former Mayor and former Ohio County Commissioner John, or Jack Fahey, as he is widely known. Today's Gateway honoree is no longer with us. In fact, it's been more than 3 decades since his passing at the age of 68. But make no mistake, it's difficult to find anyone in the annals of Wheeling history whose life was more dedicated to the betterment of Wheeling than former newspaper editor Harry Ham. This is not the first, nor will it be the last recognition bestowed upon Mr. Ham for his work in service of his beloved Wheeling. He was inducted into the Wheeling Hall of Fame for public service back in 2000, and much has been written about him in the time since his passing. For my purposes today, I'm going to focus mostly not so much on his biography, but on his actual words, from which there are so very, very many to choose from. But for those unfamiliar with Mr. Ham, he spent about 50 years working for the Ogden newspapers, mostly as the editor at the News Register. He served in the Army during World War II and received a Purple Heart for injuries suffered in combat. He and his wife Mary had 12 children, many of whom still live in the area, and some of whom are with us here today. And you can probably do the math on how many grandchildren and great-grandchildren that adds up to. Though to my knowledge he was never elected to public office, he certainly spent the vast majority of his adult life thinking and writing about public policy. In the 1960s, he penned a series of 10 articles in the News Register framing what he saw as the rebirth of Wheeling, which he characterized as the, quote, factual story of a great city's comeback. He recognized early on the opportunity that Wheeling had to take advantage of its tremendous stock of Victorian architecture. In a 1971 editorial congratulating the preservation work of the then newly formed Friends of Wheeling, Mr. Ham wrote the following, and I quote, What we are seeing today in all these efforts is that Wheeling is not a prefabricated city. Because of her age, Wheeling is a living, pulsating symbol of all that went into creating our country. There is an opportunity here to seize upon our city's historic past and build for the future. In yet another 1974 editorial, Mr. Ham's words were prescient and could just as easily be said today in the current debate we've been having about the proposed Life Hub concept. Forgive me for a long quote, but I think it's worth reading. And I quote, "Often there is help available for those in distress, but the problem is lack of information. They don't know where to turn for assistance. Frequently, an impoverished family requires the combined assistance of a number of agencies and services in order to free itself from a vicious cycle of poverty. But being referred all over town to various scattered agencies become unbearable for a person whose spirit is near the breaking point. In too many instances, the assistance provided for those in need is of a temporary or emergency nature. The coordinate of agency help is lacking to provide for a more meaningful and lasting solution to the problems. As a result, we have created a permanent caste of the dependent, a colony within a community. Establishment of a multi-services center here, in our opinion, would be a major step forward in building bridges between those in need and those with the resources of providing relief. We do believe City Council should give serious consideration to providing ample supplementary support for this multi-services center. We see it as a human investment program and as an opportunity to restore the dignity of life to many." Now, I could fill the rest of your day with quotes from Harry Ham, and you'd be the better for it, but time is never my friend at this event, and I have a lot else to get to. But if you do want to learn more about his work and his writing, there is a collection of his papers on file at the Ohio County Library, and I strongly recommend taking a purview of those papers. There's a great collection there. Of particular note is his Wheeling 2000 plan, which is penned in the 1980s. It set forth a bold vision for our wonderful city. No matter how you look at it, Harry Ham's life was one spent in furtherance of his beloved Wheeling. Of Mr. Ham, Senator Robert Byrd once said that he was both, quote, both the chronicler and the conscience of our community. Afterwards, indeed. Please join me today in congratulating the family of the City of Wheeling 7th Gateway Annual Award, a 7th Annual Gateway Award recipient, Harry Ham. Thank you all. Okay, let's bring our focus back to the present. There's a lot going on in the city of Wheeling these days, so much so that if Mr. Ham were still writing editorials, he may be celebrating the rebirth of this, quote, great city. But that had me thinking that there really isn't a singular definition of what makes a city great. But there is a general consensus around many of the key ingredients. And to name just a few, a great city must afford safety and security, a strong infrastructure, a high quality of life, a diverse job and housing opportunities, cultural vibrancy, a sense of community, openness and inclusivity, and strategic urban planning. Now, if I accomplish nothing else today, I hope I can at least make the case that Wheeling is checking a lot of those boxes. Not only because of the work spanning back several city councils, but also in large part because of the efforts of so many of you in this room and the organizations that you represent. Let's start with those first two critical ingredients, safety and security. For a city to truly thrive, it must afford its residents and visitors alike a safe and secure environment in which to flourish. And Wheeling does just that. We have a historically low crime rate for a city of our size, especially when it comes to violent crime. And while there's always room for improvements, we do a very good job in the city when it comes to keeping the public safe. And a big reason for that is we have police and fire departments comprised of men and women who are true professionals. Make no mistake, if you're in the city of Wheeling and you dial 911 in distress, qualified and capable help is on the way. So how about a round of applause for our city's first responders? It gives me great pride to be able to say that for the first time in several generations, both our police and fire departments will actually have headquarters designed for and fully compatible with the modern world. For this, much credit goes to the men and women who've served with me on the past two city councils. Without their shared vision for new public safety facilities, without their resolve amidst some early setbacks and seemingly endless criticism, without their willingness to make a very unpopular vote, our police department would not have cut the ribbon on its state-of-the-art in their headquarters earlier this month. And I'm pretty sure our fire department would not be doing the same thing later this year. Public safety has always been a strength in our city, but because of these critical investments in these new facilities, we've given our first responders the tools that they need to make sure that this community asset never becomes a liability. All right, so moving on to infrastructure. We're an old city. Just a few years ago, we celebrated the 200th anniversary of our founding. Like most old cities, by the late 20th century, Wheeling found itself put together with a lot of old parts and pieces. We've already talked about the antiquated public safety facilities, but the list is much longer. I'll give you an example. When Vice Mayor Thalman, and Councilman Thorngate, and Councilman Palmer and I took office back in 2016, the prior city council had just built a brand new state-of-the-art water treatment plant. That was the good news. But the bad news was that this brand new facility was pumping crystal clear water through some lines installed during the presidency of Chester A. Arthur. Let me assure you, there are a few worse calls you get in this office or on city council than those from residents whose basements have raw sewage being pumped into it by our city's inadequate sewer capacity. Neither our current city council nor its immediate predecessor has blinked in the face of these infrastructure deficiencies. Instead, we have attacked them the same way it is said you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And on the topic of elephants, let's begin with the one that's been in the room for nearly a decade now, the Downtown Streetscape Project. Set in motion when we took an office 7 years ago, this massive infrastructure project had been very elusive, but it has arrived, and with a vengeance. What started as a limited scope $8.7 million project has evolved into a $33 million complete facelift for our central business district. And the vast majority of this project is funded by the Western Division of Highways and by a grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation. And while the delay has been frustrating, it has afforded both the city and our local utilities the opportunity to replace all the underground lines and cables beneath the project area. And for those impacted buildings lacking a sprinkler system, we have encouraged the owners thereof to upgrade with a new 6-inch water line in advance of this project, and most have eagerly complied. I could go on about the many complex details of this project, but it's been covered very well in the media. Let me just say that we need to be patient during the next 18 to 24 months until this project is completed. And we can't forget those downtown businesses whose front doorsteps have been surrounded by orange barrels and deep holes and the sounds of construction. Just last week, I had the chance to walk U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg through the heart of this project. As a former mayor of a Rust Belt city, larger than, but really not that different from Wheeling, he saw right away the potential that this once-in-a-generation undertaking had for injecting vibrancy back into the heart of our downtown. So buckle up. Staying on the topic of infrastructure, but moving on, while the Streetscape project has gotten a lot of attention, the past two city councils have been on a very quiet but very steady mission, pretty much to repave the rest of the city. Some perspective is in order here. From July 1st of 2016, we've allocated roughly $8.5 million for paving. That works out to about $1.2 million in paving per year, between 2 and 3 times as much as had been averaged before we took office. I think the result speaks for itself. 444 streets and alleys paved, 3 city basketball courts, including Wheeling Island Marina, the 20th Street, Chapel Street parking lot, and several miles of the city's bike trail. And just last week, our Finance Committee sent City Council a proposal to fund another $800,000 of paving later this year, using funds carried over from our fiscal year surplus. Now, to be fair, you can criticize us for those remaining streets that we've not yet paved, or alleys. And indeed, my email inbox is a frequent repository of such complaints. But I challenge you to find any comparable era of sustained investment in paving that has occurred in the last 7 years. If we haven't paved your street yet, it's only because we've been busy paving those streets and alleys prioritized by city staff as being in the worst condition. Chances are a bright yellow road roller is headed your way in the near future. The next ingredient of a great city, its quality of life, is much, much harder to define, but it's no less important in an era where more and more people are choosing where they want to live first and where they want to work second. It turns out that people want to live in communities where they can't afford a high standard of living without a high cost of living. and that they look for access to quality health care, strong schools, and a variety of recreational facilities and green space. I don't know about the rest of you in this room, but I feel pretty good about where our cost of living stacks up against larger cities. And I feel pretty good about our local health care system, which is only going to get better when a new $80 million cancer center opens up on the footprint of the former OVMC campus. And it's hard not to feel pretty good about Ohio County having the best assortment of public and private schools in the state. But I could not be more proud of the work on City Council over the past 7 years, moving the needle forward on our parks and recreation system, and in particular, our playgrounds. Those who listen to the Vice Mayor and me on our weekly radio show have probably heard this ad nauseum, and I apologize, but it bears repeating. When we campaigned for office 8 years ago, we were told by some that children don't use playgrounds anymore. Playgrounds are a waste of money. Well, fortunately, we didn't listen to these so-called experts, and instead listened to parents. And time again, they told us that their kids would use a neighborhood playground if it didn't have rusting equipment from the last century. And the results, since, have been nothing short of spectacular. We've made significant upgrades to 18 of our 22 city playgrounds since 2016. The most recent of these upgrades, Edgington Lane, very well might be the most impressive of all. And by year's end, it's the hope of our Parks and Recreation Director, Rochelle Berry, to have the remaining 4 replaced as well. And just last week, City Council approved funds for a new 23rd playground to be situated in the northeast portion of Market Plaza downtown. This new amenity is going to make it possible for a new child care center to be opened up next door. And such a complete rethinking of our network of playgrounds doesn't happen without broad consensus on City Council. And I really want to thank my fellow members of Council for their continued support of these critical recreational investments. And I have to add that as a relatively new parent myself, I've seen firsthand just how important these playgrounds are for childhood development. And my wife is going to stop at nothing until our son Harrison has explored and conquered each one. Before we leave Parks and Recreation, let me quickly mention one other type of recreation asset we have focused on, specifically dog parks. Thanks to the success of the flagship Fitzsimmons Family Dog Park at Tunnel Green, and thanks to the continued generosity of the Fitzsimmons Family Foundation, we now have 2 more dog parks within the city, both bearing the Fitzsimmons family name. The first one at Wheeling Park opened last fall, and we will soon be having the ribbon cutting for the second one in Warwood later this year. What is the net result of all of these quality of life investments? Well, for starters, just last month, Fortune magazine ranked Wheeling as the top city in West Virginia and the 33rd city in the nation for families. And thank you. And recently, City Council was provided a report which was contracted by our partner Bellamar, which made a very compelling case that Wheeling is ideally situated to leverage its low cost of living and numerous quality of life assets to attract remote workers. It's only a matter of time before the outside world fully appreciates what we already know. How Wheeling is a great place to live and raise a family. All right, moving on. It should be self-evident that no city can achieve greatness without having opportunities for quality employment and for affordable housing. I've lost track of how many local business owners have told me that their number one issue these days is finding employees. It is a common refrain that has only been exacerbated in recent years. So what's the issue? One of the key culprits we've identified is a lack of diverse housing options. This is not to say, we don't have quality homes in our community. If you want a 120-year-old Victorian house in a neighborhood with towering trees, well, you've come to the right city. But those homes aren't for everybody. Some people want new housing free of the maintenance worries of an old home. Some do not want yards. Some want to live where they can walk to work and walk to restaurants and walk to the grocery store. And some have budgets that constrain which neighborhoods they can afford. For Wheeling to maximize its employment possibilities, it must ensure we have a diverse menu of housing opportunities. Without doing so, our housing stock is going to continue to act as a bottleneck for our workforce. So in this regard, I'm happy to say we're moving in the right direction. Our strategy has been very simple. In a city without much available flat land for new neighborhood developments, why not encourage housing on vacant lots or in vacant buildings where we already have adjacent streets and nearby water and sewer lines? Fortunately, we had developers willing to do just that. If you've been driven south on Main Street during the past year, you've surely noticed the construction of the Doris on Main taking place on what used to be a very unattractive surface parking lot. This 46-unit new apartment complex is being undertaken by Wodo Cooper Companies, and they've shown a continued interest in investing in Wheeling. And if you drive north in the 1100 block of Mark Street, you'll see crews working on the exterior of the future Wheeling Pit Loss project. Though delayed because of supply chain issues and rising interest rates, make no mistake, this $40 million project is happening. Just a few months ago, four of us, Vice Mayor Thalman, Councilor Seiler, City Manager Herron, and myself, we drove to Canton to meet with the project developer Steve Kuhn and the rest of his team, and we talked about their plans for how this project is going to move forward. And make no mistake, when complete, this project is going to fill a long vacant building with about 110 newly renovated market-rate apartment units. Just down the street on Market Street, crews have been fast at work, stabilizing and abating 4 historic buildings in the 1400 block for an upcoming renovation project. The upper floors of this project is going to include housing as well, and this project is being undertaken by Desmond Architects from Pittsburgh, and has involved a terrific collaboration with city partners, including Wheeling Heritage and RED, as well as a group of local banks. Jumping quickly back to Main Street, one of the most exciting new housing projects is the DiCarlo building planned for the vacant lot at 1115 Main Street. What makes this project different is that it will be condominiums and not apartments. First listed for sale in February, 5 of the planned units were quickly sold or under contract. And that inspired Tony DiCarlo, the project owner, to work with her developer to add a 5th floor and 2 more units to this project. Stay tuned for an exciting new addition to our local housing stock. Just real quickly, earlier this month, we added a new tool to our housing development toolkit. Specifically, the West Virginia Secretaries of Commerce, Economic Development, and Tourism each signed a letter certifying Wheeling as a designated Build West Virginia housing district. This new law is going to allow future housing projects to take advantage of targeted tax credits for qualifying projects. So to close out this section on jobs and housing, let me just note that beyond the surplus of employment opportunities we have in Wheeling right now, I think there's an even larger reservoir of self-employment potential. Indeed, the Wheeling of the early 20th century we all like to think back to was built far more by local entrepreneurship than it was by companies from afar moving here. And our next 2 honorees have exhibited precisely this type of entrepreneurial spirit that came to define Wheeling of old. I'm referring to Jessica Barclay and Vanessa Craig, who began their business adventure by focusing on something near and dear to so many of us, our dogs. Since 2005, they've opened 3 popular dog hotel and social adventure sitters, appropriately called Plain Stay Pet Camp. The latest installment in this budding Plain Stay empire opened in December of 2022 in South Wheeling. And along the way, they decided to broaden their focus from canine care to human wellness. In May of 2019, they opened up Thrive on Main Street in downtown Wheeling. In the process, not only have they brought new life to a once vacant building, but they've also brought services like cryotherapy, infrared sauna, flotation therapy, IV and halotherapy, and so on to a community where the quote, smart investors might have said it would never work. But despite opening up just before a pandemic and a seemingly endless streetscape project, Thrive has well thrived in its downtown location. And if you walk by during business hours, you're going to see more than just a freshly renovated building. You're going to hear the sounds of pop music coming from their external sound system, which adds exactly the sort of life and vibrancy to our rapidly evolving downtown footprint. And now there are some who say that what Wheeling needs is really for more outside companies to move in here and create new jobs. And we always look for and always welcome outside investment. But what I think Wheeling needs the most of is more of that entrepreneurial spirit embodied by these 2 ambitious ladies. So please join me in congratulating Jessica Barclay and Vanessa Craig for bringing the I can do attitude back into the Wheeling feeling. A city with cultural vibrancy is one that celebrates its cultural diversity and heritage with a robust combination of the arts, of music, of theater, festive, live entertainment, and so on. I'm going to save some time today by saying what some of us in this room know. As a community, we know how to throw a party. In just a few days, downtown and center Wheeling are going to be overtaken by thousands of visitors taking advantage of the Italian and Grecian festivals, respectively. And those are just 2 of the more than dozen local festivals held annually to celebrate the variety of cultural influences we have in this community. It's also safe to say we're a town that knows how to show up to watch live sports. For decades, the Wheeling Nailers have been a mainstay on the ice at West Bank Arena. And just earlier this month, we learned that a new arena football team, the West Virginia Miners, is going to be hosting at least 5 home games a year here going forward. We've also been able to convince 2 successful basketball tournaments to relocate from Charleston to Wheeling. The MEC Basketball Championship Tournament has had a great run here over the past 5 years, and it hopes to make Wheeling its forever home. And tonight at West Bank Arena, for the first time, we'll be kicking off the first round of the TBT tournament, featuring a Best Virginia team comprised of former WU stars. So while we're at it, let's also take note of the higher quality of music and comedy shows we seem to be getting at West Bank Arena and the Capitol Theater. Thanks to the leadership of new Executive Director Kelly Tucker, we've been turning up the volume of what is possible in these 2 entertainment venues. Overall sales for both facilities are up 62% in the past fiscal year, and combined with the newly created Entertainment Endowment Fund, this should mean even bigger and better shows going forward. And our next honoree has done a lot himself to enhance and expand the local arts and cultural scene during his 5 years as the music director of the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra. I'm, of course, talking about Dr. John Devlin. Now, to be clear, the Wheeling Symphony has been delivering quality symphonic music for nearly a century, and John's predecessor was no exception to this proud tradition. But something feels a little different with John at the helm. Something new, something fresh, something even maybe a little edgy. For one thing, through his innovative concert designs, John has transcended boundaries typically associated with symphonic music. If you happen to attend last season's opening show at the Capitol Theater, I promise you won't forget it. And I'm not referring to the fact that the most famous classical musician in the world, Yo-Yo Ma, actually performed in that show. Though that in itself was pretty amazing and a testament to how seriously John is taken in his field. What made that show so memorable for me was that it featured an intricate and delicate dance between dissimilar styles of music. On the one hand, you had an orchestra playing what sounded fairly conventional, but on the other hand, you had a beatboxer and hip-hop artist who was performing something very different. And the combination was electric. But another reason why things seem to be a little different with John is, quite frankly, because he's here. Unlike others who have occupied his post, John has made Wheeling his home. He and his wife, Camille, have made a very concerted effort to embrace everything that is Wheeling, except perhaps the pizza. Despite many efforts on my own part, there is just no convincing this New York native that pizza should ever be served with cold cheese. We're going to keep working on that. But in the meantime, I'm going to share one fact about John that I learned only in preparing today's speech. He is the first honoree at this event who's ever given a keynote, a TED Talk at a TEDx symposium. If you don't know what a TED Talk is, let's just say they're usually given by people who are really, really smart, who've done really, really amazing things, or in most cases, both. But they're rarely given by people this humble. I've known John for about 4 years now pretty well. And there are countless times he could have said to me, oh, by the way, I gave a TED Talk once. But that's not his style. And in keeping it formal, when we asked him for information to include today, his main concern was that we acknowledge how hard his board and staff have worked in recent years while they navigated a pandemic and a prolonged vacancy in their executive director position without sacrificing the quality of their music. Please join me in congratulating Dr. John Devlin, or as I'm going to be calling him going forward, Ted. As we think about all the elements of Wheeling's cultural vibrancy, try to imagine the void that would exist without the historic Capitol Theater. Our next honoree knows a thing or two about that project. Frank O'Brien is in his 51st year of his long love affair with Wheeling that began when he attended band camp back at Camp Russell. Though he's never actually lived in Wheeling, Frank is as Wheeling as our one-way streets and our fried fish sandwiches. For nearly 2 decades, his was one of the best-known faces of Wheeling as a reporter and anchor at WTRF. In 2005, he moved from reporting the news to actually making it, and he became the executive director of the Wheeling, Ohio County Convention and Visitors Bureau. It was perfect timing, because in 2000, the iconic Capitol Theater went dark after it was found to be in violation of numerous public safety codes. The story of what happened thereafter has been well documented. I'm not going to repeat it, but let's say that many organizations stepped up. Many people in this room stepped up. But make no mistake, Frank and the CVB were at the heart of it. And by the close of 2009, and after $4 million in renovations, the CVB had both purchased and restored our city's only irreplaceable entertainment venue. 10 years later, in 2019, Frank and the CVB held a mortgage burning celebration after all the debt had been extinguished. Thanks to his efforts and the efforts of so many others in this community and indeed in this room, countless generations of Wheeling residents not yet born will be ensured the opportunity to enjoy this priceless community asset. And so given Frank's track record in getting the CVB to go outside its conventional lane, back then, it should come as no surprise that Frank has pushed the CVB to take the lead on developing another downtown project. Last year, the CVB purchased the former Wheeling Inn next to the historic Wheeling Suspension Bridge with a plan to create a new Wheeling Welcome Center and gateway to Wheeling and West Virginia for those traveling on I-70. Through a partnership with Wheeling Heritage, Frank has been on a mission to secure the estimated $16 million in funds necessary to demolish the existing hotel structure and build a new Welcome Center in the northwest corner of our downtown. Just this past Friday, the Senate Appropriations Committee advanced a bill containing $5 million earmarked for this project, which had been requested by Senator Joe Manchin. And efforts are underway to secure West Virginia tourism funds to complete the project. While it may take a few years and some additional funds to get there, we're very thankful to have people like Frank in our community. Please join me in congratulating Frank O'Brien and his team at CVB for a job well done. Our sixth ingredient for a great city is also somewhat hard to define, but it refers to the way communities foster social connections and civic engagement and a sense of belonging. I can think of no better way to start this discussion than with our next honoree. When asked to describe what is going on in Wheeling these days, it's so easy to start with all the many projects, both public and private investments taking place. And it's a pretty impressive list. But Wheeling will always be defined first and foremost by its people. And for the past 11 years of this event, we have singled out one honoree for his or her particular efforts to make Wheeling a better place to live. This recognition is called the Community Spirit Award, and in just a moment I'm going to share the name of this year's recipient. But let's just take a moment to pause and look at some of the incredible names found among its first 11 honorees, many of whom I'm sure you'll recognize. You'll be happy to know that today's honoree was going to fit right in with this illustrious group. And that's because our 2023 Community Spirit Award recipient is none other than Dr. and suffragan Bishop Darrell Cummings. Dr. Cummings has served as pastor of the Bethlehem Apostolic Temple in Wheeling for more than 4 decades. And for much of that time, he's used his ministry to give back to his adopted community. By holding holiday giveaways, by literally handing out food to families, by making sure that our local children have school supplies, and so on. It's no stretch to say that his name has become synonymous with caring in this community. And it's likewise no surprise that he's been named the 2023 recipient of the Dr. Lee Jones Patron of Youth Award. Wheeling YMCA Executive Director Adam Shinsky had this to say about why Dr. Cummings was selected for that award. We give this award to people who make a difference, and that's an understatement for the work that he does. He makes holidays. He makes people's years. He makes kids' school years. Beyond his charitable endeavors, Dr. Cummings makes time to service on numerous boards, committees, and councils, including serving as the president of the Western Human Rights Commission. Throughout all this, he's been a consistent voice for justice, for fairness, and compassion, speaking through countless op-eds in statewide newspapers and speaking out when his voice is most needed. Through it all, he's kept his focus on building a congregation that has fostered countless interracial connections in our community. So much so that in 2021, the Washington Post did a feature story on him entitled, "The Pastor Who Defied the Odds: How a West Virginia Reverend Created Something Distinctive, a Diverse Congregation in an Overwhelmingly White Area." To quote Dr. Cummings from that story, "We're not a black church or a white church, we're just a church." He is one of those rare individuals who's equally comfortable in any room, regardless of its racial or socioeconomic or religious makeup. For all his accolades and accomplishments, through all his friendships and appointments, he stayed true to the core reasons that drove him into the ministry in the first place: a message of hope, of economic opportunity, and justice for all. Please join me in thanking and congratulating Dr. Darrell Cummings as the 2023 recipient of the Community Spirit Award. Today's next honoree knows a thing or two about building community bonds as well. Christy Ferguson moved to Wheeling back in 2017 on somewhat of a whim. As a licensed massage therapist and as an accomplished photographer, she admits that she didn't see Wheeling as a likely destination. But she decided to give the friendly city a chance to be near her sister and 3 nieces. Well, the result's been good for Christy and for Wheeling. Shortly after moving here, she opened Elite Massage Therapy in Elm Grove. And soon she became active in the Elm Grove Business Association, so much so that by 2022 she'd been elected as president. In that position, she's worked to strengthen the bonds between the Elm Grove businesses and their surrounding community. She has said, and I quote, if we want the community to support local businesses as businesses, we must first support the community. Through her leadership, the Elm Grove Business Association has been busy with measures to enhance the look, feel, and experience of the Elm Grove community. It has undertaken beautification measures and painting curves and planting flowers alongside Nashua Road, incorporating artwork from Ohio County students wherever possible. It has created 2 annual events, Grooving in the Grove and the Elm Grove Fall Fest, that are already becoming annual staples, and has sponsored and hung banners celebrating various holidays and local businesses. In short, while Christy's journey to Wheeling may have been by chance, so much of what she's done since has been with purpose. Has been done with a purpose towards making her community the best place that it can be. And she has said that she feels more at home here in her adopted city of Wheeling than she has anywhere else. So let us all do what we can to try to keep it that way. Join me in congratulating Christy Ferguson, President of the Elm Grove Business Association. Our 7th ingredient for a great city is the way it embraces diversity and ensures that residents and visitors, regardless of their background, feel welcome and valued. Ensuring precisely this has been a priority of the past 2 city councils, even if some in our community are not so happy about it. We've been told to, quote, stay in our lane and to stay away from so-called social issues. But I've always found 2 flaws in this line of thought. First, our city government is perfectly capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. No economic development project, no street paving, no sewer line replacement, or no new playground has ever been delayed or forgotten because we debated an ordinance protecting minority rights. It just meant we've had some meetings run a little bit long from time to time. But moreover, the implicit suggestion that extending civil rights protections is somehow bad for business, I could not be further from the truth. To this end, during my time on council, we've taken bold steps toward being a more open and inclusive society. Most of you in this room will remember the non-discrimination ordinance that the last city council approved in 2016. But members of our current city council deserve much credit for taking that inclusion baton and running with it. In October 2020, we approved a resolution recognizing racism as a public health crisis and directed city staff to incorporate best practices to prevent both implicit and explicit racial bias in our policies and enforcement efforts. In May of last year, we voted 4-3 to make Wheeling the 3rd city in West Virginia to ban the scientifically disproven practice of conversion therapy. And in February of this year, we voted unanimously in support of the Crown Act to combat discrimination because of anyone's natural hair texture. Contrary to what some may believe, these initiatives do not detract from what we do. Rather, they show who we are. And to close out our discussion on this topic, I'm going to borrow a line used by our good friend Rabbi Leaf, who we've heard from several times today. During the public comment, while City Council was debating the Crown Act, he said this, and I think it's worth repeating. Just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it isn't happening. What a different world it would be if the rest of us all thought that way. So, lastly, we're going to get on to strategic urban planning. That's the last city ingredient, right? Well, as much as I want to get into this topic, doing so this late in my remarks might yield a mad dash for the exits or for the casino bar. So I'm scrapping it entirely. There's going to be a lot to say on this topic next year when the city updates its comprehensive plan. But lest you all think that means I'm done, you clearly don't know me. This is, after all, me, and brevity has never been a strength. Before we part ways, I want to say a few words about the importance of hope. Specifically the hope for a better tomorrow. For many years, this community has been caught in somewhat of an identity crisis. No matter how many exciting new projects or investments are happening, it's hard for some to see Wheeling as anything else than a place that used to be something better. a bustling city of 70,000 residents, a city encompassed with steel mills and heavy industry, a city whose downtown streets were filled with shoulder-to-shoulder shoppers, patronizing endless retail outlets. The problem with thinking Wheeling that way is nobody wants to live in a city defined as one that used to be better. And as long as the narrative persists about this magical Wheeling of yesteryear, it is easy to greet the present with cynicism, and thus easy to tune out those of us who are trying to paint a future that looks like something different. It turns out the truth in all matters nostalgic is always a little bit complicated. Let's pick a year, let's say 1955, and try to envision standing on the corner of 12th and Market Street, looking at this bustling downtown. Now, all right, I try to imagine yourself standing on that exact corner at that exact time in a wheelchair, wondering how many businesses could accommodate your entrance. Or as a woman, wanting a career. Or as a black man, wondering in which establishments he was welcome. Or as a lesbian trapped in a marriage to a man she could not love. My point here is not to judge the past by contemporary standards. Societies can and must evolve. But my point is we need perspective. Looking out in this room, it is not a stretch to say that for many of you, there are more opportunities in Wheeling today than at any point in our history. And it's long past time we started judging today not against some arbitrary barometer which was calibrated in the 1950s, but instead by reference to where we are headed. In other words, where we are going is in many respects far less important. Where we are is in many respects far less important than where we are going. And I say this not to dishonor anyone's past. I will always be in awe of what once was here. And I will always understand why so many of you embrace that history. But where the rubbers sometimes meet the road is in the marketplace of new ideas that are offered for the future of the city. Far too many have come to see anything new as a threat to that nostalgic sense of how things should be. We sometimes lament the loss of how things were, but we line up to cheer on the failure of anyone trying to set about a new path. There's nothing wrong with healthy skepticism, but it requires a certain degree of willful blindness to ignore everything happening in our town right now. We've not seen this level of overall investment in over a century. And I recognize some of you may not want to admit this. Maybe there's comfort in cynicism. But make no mistake, the Wheeling of 10 years from now is going to look dramatically different than it does today. And how that future compares to 1955 is of far less interest to me than how it compares to 2023. It's going to be up to future city leaders and many of you in this room to nudge this trajectory one way or another. I sincerely hope we continue to nudge this trajectory forward, not backwards. But either way, I look forward to the ride as a passenger. Our final honoree today is an organization which is uniquely equipped to bridge our city's rich history with its auspicious future. For 53 years, Friends of Wheeling has known just how lucky we are as a community to have such a rich stock of historic architecture sprinkled throughout our neighborhoods. In its early years, it was actively involved in numerous redevelopment projects that brought an awareness of and appreciation for the historic preservation and what it means to this community. But as time went on, Friends gradually shifted from more active renovation projects and instead became focused more on education and advocacy. It perhaps became best known for its monthly tours of historic properties before and after renovation. But around a decade ago, members of the board, including Gene Finstein and Jay Fry, became convinced that the local preservation community had taken too much of a passive role, while demolitions of local historic properties had become all too common. And so they decided to put some skin back in the game, and they established a preservation loan guarantee program that reduces the borrowing cost for those rehabbing with historic Wheeling properties. And encouraged by this program's tremendous success, they decided to go a step further. Just last year, Friends of Wheeling rediscovered its active roots and took ownership of and responsibility for the historic used duplex in North Wheeling. To say that these antebellum homes had fallen into hard times would be an understatement. But Friends of Wheeling was not deterred and has been diligently fundraising and leveraging grants, including the city's facade improvement program, to give these buildings a new lease on life. And thanks to its efforts, the used duplex will soon be an asset, will again be an asset to the North Wheeling Historic District for decades to come. Now, earlier I read from an editorial written by Harry Ham back in 1971 commending the work that Friends of Wheeling and other preservationists were doing. That same editorial concluded as follows: "Who knows but that these initial efforts today at restoration might set the stage for a true adventure into at least a partially restored neighborhood in our city, a place where the young can relive the excitement of early Wheeling and that the future may learn from the past." Because of the of the efforts of organizations like Friends of Wheeling, we can appreciate and indeed learn from the past without longing for it. And so please join me in thanking Friends of Wheeling for putting its commitment to historic preservation into action for the benefit of our shared future. And now for the words you've all been waiting for. In closing, if 7+ years in this position has taught me anything, it's that there's no greater truth in political affairs than what President Lincoln said about pleasing some of the people some of the time. That said, if I may paraphrase the late British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, I sometimes feel that in this position, if my critics saw me walk across the Ohio River, they'd say it's because I can't swim. Trust me, I'm not complaining. This is what I signed up for, and there's much comfort in knowing that this time next year, someone else is going to walk through the frozen food aisle at Kroger, terrified that a resident angry about a pothole is going to corner them. But I do feel compelled to respond to one of the most frequent and, in my opinion, inaccurate criticisms which has been lobbed towards me in the past 2 city councils. And that is the notion that we have somehow spent taxpayer funds with reckless abandon. The truth is that despite all the myriad public investments and initiatives put into action by the last 2 councils, we have been careful stewards of the city's budgets. From 2004 until the time I took office in 2016, the city had a budget stabilization fund of about $1.8 million. Today it stands at $5 million. To put that in perspective, in the midst of paving more streets at any comparable time in modern history, of providing long overdue new headquarters for our first responders, of completely revamping our network of playgrounds and incentivizing new developments like the Wheeling Pit Loft, the Doris on Main, the 1400 block properties, and the planned WU Medicine Center, Cancer Center, and so on, we have not only maintained a balanced budget, but we've also nearly tripled our city's rainy day fund for the future. A lot of ways you can talk about our stewardship, but reckless is not one of them. We have not spent beyond our means. And it's fair to point out that the city has received an unprecedented amount of federal funds in recent years. But we also experienced an unprecedented economic interruption and have dealt with the same cost and supply chain issues as the private sector. Moreover, we've directed millions of those dollars out into the community to propel some incredibly exciting new private sector projects. I had hoped to provide a full accounting of all those federal expenditures today, but for the benefit of all of you, I'm going to post it on my Facebook page later. But let me wrap things up by getting into what is my primary duty here today, to give you my assessment of where the city is. If you've been paying attention, you'd be correct in finding me bullish on the topic. At the same time, if you've been paying attention too closely, you're probably tired of hearing what I have to say. So for this year's assessment, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to borrow the words of the U.S. Secretary of Transportation who visited Wheeling just last week, who said this, and I quote, "I'd say this is a proud community. And it's a community that's been through its ups and downs, but it's on the way up right now. You can feel the energy here. You can see the sense of momentum here. If Wheeling were a stock, I'd be buying." Mr. Secretary, I agree. And as I look out in this room of fellow Wheeling shareholders, I think it's safe to say that this is not a time to be selling. It's been the honor of my life to stand here these past 7 years. I share the space with so many people who love Wheeling. And to my colleagues on City Council, while we may not always agree on what we want to do, I thank each of you to a person for knowing why it is we do what we do. Thank you. Amen. Woo. Woo.